If you had the opportunity to sit down and talk to somebody who had practiced law for nearly 40 years, who's now talking from the safety of retirement, as he says, wouldn't you love to sit down and just pepper them with questions and find out what worked, what didn't work, what mistakes did he make, and find out the actual truth about what's going on in the practice of law? Well, I sat down with Murray Gottheil recently and asked him, hopefully, the questions that you would ask him, and he told the truth. He gave a lot of nuggets, he gave a lot of stories and insights, and it follows along what he's been doing for a long time on his LinkedIn page. And if you're not following him, do so. He has a lot of value to share, and I was thrilled to interview him. He's now in cottage country, enjoying his retirement, but still giving back. So I was glad to secure him for a little while and share his insights with you. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Welcome to the Lawyer Launcher Podcast. Hello, friends. I'm your host, Susan Van Dyke. If you're a law student or a new lawyer eager to launch a successful career, you're in the right place. Drawing on more than 25 years of experience, I'll demystify the business of law and help you understand just what it takes to succeed. We'll empower you, help build confidence, and reduce anxiety. Our experts will share tips and advice, and I can't wait for you to hear from them. Now, let's dive in. Murray, thanks so much for indulging me in this conversation from, as you say, the safety of retirement, which should have been a cue to me for your sense of humor, number one, and number two, your willingness and eagerness, I'll say, to speak the truth about your experience of many, many years, almost 40 years of practicing law, all corporate law, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, all business law.
All business law, and managing partner of a mid-sized firm near Toronto, which I've already spoken about. So I'm really happy to have you here. I'm so happy for students and young professionals, new professionals, to hear what you have to say. And I wanted to start with, you have spent a lot of time on LinkedIn and surely in other spaces spending a lot of time talking about your truths, your observations, sharing advice, etc. So what drives you? I mean, you could be fishing, you could be hiking, you could be doing many, many other things as somebody who has a well-deserved retirement in front of you. What drives you to continue in this way?
Well, you spend all those years being productive and worrying about things like billable hours and marketing and everything else. And then, when I retired, I moved to the country. Well, I moved to the country right as COVID struck, which is when I retired. And all of a sudden I'm sitting out here in the winter with absolutely nothing to do. So I started playing with LinkedIn. And what I found is it's nice to be sort of active, working, if we call it working, for an hour or two a day. Not every day, not on consecutive days, not when it's warm outside, but it is nice to be able to use your brain a little bit. So I do what I do initially and primarily for my own entertainment. But as I got into it and started speaking to a lot of people, a lot of young lawyers, I started really enjoying it, and there's a lot of gratification from it. There are some people I've managed to help in their careers, and some people I've actually found some jobs for, and just help them along, and it's fun. I'm kind of selfish about it. I'm doing it for my own entertainment primarily.
I love that. And I was saying to a client actually just yesterday in a boardroom of lawyers, I said, part of what the podcast does for me personally is it scratches an itch of things that have maybe been bothering me or things that I wish I could say or do with a client. Maybe you feel the same way, that in your past, you wish you could have deployed some of these things or talked to your younger self.
Well, I certainly spent a lot of time worrying about, about the basics of getting the work done and somehow finding family time and basically being always busy and stressed. I can't say I was the nicest person through all that time. I was kind of driven. And now I do get to actually spend some time helping some of the younger folks. And I guess that does scratch a certain itch, feeling a little better about myself.
Yeah. Oh, giving back a little more. That's great. And I think one of the things I wanted to ask you before we start, and we're going to talk about biggest mistakes and some hard truths, which I'm really excited about. Mm-hmm. How would your younger self let me rephrase this. How would your younger self have benefited from your advice that you're going to give us today?
Well, I think my younger self had absolutely no clue about why I was going into law or what I was going to do or what it meant to practice law, what it was all about, which means I basically did what a lot of people do. I bounced from opportunity to opportunity. I did really well in law school, so I got invited by the largest firm in Montreal. I went to McGill to summer there for a few years. And with that on my resume, I was easily able to get an articling job, a good articling job in Toronto. So I went there. I didn't get hired back because I didn't have enough self-confidence, they told me. And then I looked for a job in a recession in the early 80s and took the first job that was available. So I found that I did not plan my career. My career just happened. And if I could go back and do anything differently, I would have planned the whole thing out as opposed to let it happen to me.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's get into things about biggest mistakes, what students make and how to avoid them. You and I have talked about this, and we have shared some of our shared thinking around this. I know you have a few things to share. Where would you start on what are some of the biggest mistakes students can make?
Well, I think the first mistake that students can make is graduating from law school and not understanding anything about, frankly, about life and about the legal profession. They go in and they think there's a system and they think there's a plan and they think that if they just work hard and do everything, people will notice and that's how they're going to be successful. And the first thing that I think, whether it be law students or anyone else, have to know is you have to plan this out and do it for yourself. And step one is it's a tough grind being in a law firm. Mm-hmm. And you need to be your best psychological self going in. And you have to understand that we are all in sales. And that's kind of funny because people go into law school because they don't want to be in something as simple as being a salesperson. Yeah, but you have to understand that we are all selling. We are selling ourselves, if nothing else. We're selling to clients. We're selling to senior partners. So the first thing I'd say to students is, or young people coming in, is look at yourself, really evaluate yourself, know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and start working on them. So, for example, if you're the type, as I was early in my career, where we all had to go around the room and say something about ourselves, and the whole time other people were talking, rather than listening to them, I was just worrying about what I was going to say when it got to be my turn. If you're that type who can't just easily speak up, go to Toastmasters. Go deal with it. When you arrive at that law firm, be the type of person who can speak up for themselves and project confidence. If you're the type that panics, learn how to deal with panics. Be your best psychological self and understand that going into a law firm, it's a lot more than knowing law or learning legal skills. You need to be learning about how to develop relationships with people. If you want to get ahead, you have to be personable, and you, as I said, have to be your best psychological self.
And I think what you're talking about also is having that degree of self-awareness. And what I mean by that, a lot of my clients, there's probably a stat somewhere, 80% or higher are introverts. These are, left brain thinking, yep. Internal folks who draw on that strength to perform well at the practice of law. And I'm generalizing, of course I'm generalizing. But what that often means is the typical extrovert, thinking on your feet, speaking on your feet. And of course, there's lots of litigators who are good at that. There's also lots of solicitors who are good at that. But as a student, a new young professional, that can really be challenging. And I want to tell you a quick story. You just reminded me, actually. When I was an intern, I had graduated in marketing and I was an intern, not working in law, but working in a government, a crown corporation. And I remember being in a boardroom, a small boardroom. And I've generally been an extrovert most of my life. And I was in this meeting and I was so nervous of being called upon. I knew nothing. Had complete imposter syndrome. I thought, good Lord, please don't look at me. Don't ask me a question. I want to be invisible. Where's my cape? I just want to put an invisible cape over my head. And I'm sure I was sitting there bright red, blushing, so concerned about getting called upon when they finally did call on me for something super minor that would be easy I was just aflame. And I felt the same way walking through the office too. I was so bashful, so shy. I was all of, what would I have been, 22-ish years old, something like that. So not a kid, but somebody who, had some education and was, had some value to bring, but couldn't get that confidence. So I think to have that self-awareness and then get some help to work on it, because all the things that you're talking about are teachable, right?
Yes, they're all teachable, although there's some people in the legal profession who don't see it that way. I had one partner I argued with for years and years. When it came to hiring people, he only wanted to hire the extroverts who seem like they know how to go out and develop business on their own. And I was always arguing, let's hire the smartest, most capable people we can, and if they're introverts, we'll teach them how to do that stuff. And that was a back and forth argument. But realize there are people in the profession, and you may go to work. A young person might go to work for one of them, who will judge them very quickly on the exterior, on their exterior. And that's why you have to be your best going in and dealing with that.
One of my clients generally loved to hire people who had experience in hospitality. So if they had a
Yeah,
waitressing or waiter job or anything to do in service, they
yeah.
felt, and I think it proved pretty true, they felt that that would give somebody a leg up, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, in building relationships and being a good listener and being in a service mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And it served his firm well to do that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and talking about having self-awareness, there was one fellow who joined our firm after a few years' experience with one of the bigger law firms, and I'd say he had zero self-awareness. He thought that, but he had, I guess his insecurity was masked by always wanting to project just how much he knew, and that masked his insecurities. But the result was you couldn't teach him anything. It was
Oh.
completely unteachable because when you tried to teach him, he just wanted to argue back with you and try to prove that he was right all along. And I thought that for an otherwise intelligent fellow, he really did not do himself a service because he just didn't have that sense of self awareness that he had things to learn and he wasn't willing to learn them. It
I
was
feel
a,
like, yeah, sorry, Marie. I feel like you're on to number two. So number one is have that self-awareness, build confidence. And then number two, if I'm hearing you correctly, is to have an openness for learning. Don't push back, really be available to grow and learn based on what you're hearing from other
the
people.
best young student I ever had. I used to say of her, she had the most interesting combination of being independent and submissive. She was a
Ah.
really confident, independent person, but she had no ego about sitting back and saying, "I don't know, teach me." And I thought she was just the best lawyer. In fact, I liked her so much I married her eventually, but that's a whole other story. And she is no longer the slightest bit submissive, but she's still very independent. I'll tell you that. But 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 young people don't realize this. They don't know when they graduate law school that they actually know nothing about practicing law. Somehow they, for good reason, they figure we spend all this money. Certainly, law school must have taught us what we need to know to practice. And the reality is it hasn't. They know nothing or close to nothing about what they need to know to practice law. They don't even know what's important to succeed in a law firm,
Mm-hmm.
which means that if they're open to learning that from day one, they're way ahead. If their ego is such or their insecurity is such that they're not open to learning it, they're just way behind.
I would love to reframe the statement of being submissive to being in a mindset of learning and growth. Submissive feels subservient. And I think what you're saying is be open to learning and growing just like you do as a student.
Yes, you're using better language than I used at the time and that I use now, but that is how I said it at the time. So I repeated it verbatim. But you're right; it's not submissive. It's a willingness to learn.
Yeah, willingness to learn and be guided and be mentored and I loved your statement about ego, setting the ego aside, because sometimes the ego is what gets in the way. It can fight us. You can be in conflict with your ego. So just to have that, again, we're coming back to kind of self-awareness. I want to move on to one of the other mistakes that you had mentioned to me, and that was about not taking ownership of your work, which is huge, a huge area that I hear from a lot of my clients and partners. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, sure. Um, you have to go from as a young person wanting to get ahead in a law firm, you are trying to demonstrate that you're a future partner, you're a future owner, and you want to go from employee mentality, which says, "You asked me to do something, here it is," to ownership mentality, which is you ask me to do something, here it is, here's what I think about it, here's how we can make it better, what do you want me to do next, or can I do the following things, etc. I used to tell the people who worked for me, maybe it was a good thing to do, tell them maybe it wasn't, but I used to say, your job's to make my life easier. I'm already completely stressed out. I've hired you so you can make my life easier. And if there's a small piece of work, if there's 10 things that come out of it and you're already jumping on them and doing them, you're making my life easier. If you're waiting for me to feed you back, to look at it and give you the next thing to do, you're not making my life easier. And that's what partners want to see.
So I love that statement. And what I'm hearing you say, where a student might get instructions for ABC, and you're really looking for them to do ABC, but to consider DEF. What are the next steps beyond that? But they may not have clarity. They may not have detailed instructions. They might want to give it a go, but they are worried about making a mistake. They're worried about wasting time. They're worried about using firm resources, research resources, et cetera, that take them off track. So it kind of loops back to what you were talking about earlier, Murray, about confidence. So what would a student do in that case?
I think the student says, here's ABC. Seems to me the next steps are DEF. I would love to work on them if you'd like me to work on them. And in order to do that, I've sat down and I've put together a list of questions of information that I think I need. I think I need A, B, C, and D. I can do that on my own. But I'd have the following questions. And would you like me to move forward? And can you answer the questions so I can get going? I'm saying, wow, where'd this person come from? I like them.
Fantastic. I know. I love that so much. It's taking initiative. It's taking ownership, as you said earlier. And it's using your emotional intelligence to consider what the partner's going through, and what their next needs might be related to that file. And it also is so helpful if the instructions from the lawyer, it might be a partner, it might be a senior associate, just to qualify that, is to give context for the whole file, not just the little bit of instructions of here's what you're doing right now, but here's the client, here's the file, here's a little bit of background. Give the student, the new associate, some context so it's easier for them to take initiative.
It would be nice if the senior lawyers, whether it be partners or senior associates, did that. And some of them will do that consistently well, and some of them won't, which leaves a junior person in an interesting situation. Somebody's given them instructions, they're half-baked, they can't do a good job based on the instructions they have, but the person's already shown by giving these half-baked instructions that they're already impatient, they're overworked, they're stressed, they're wanting to move on to the next thing, and they're making you feel insecure and nervous about even asking any questions. So at that point, the young person has two choices. They can take the inadequate instructions, go away, do an inadequate job, come back, and then the supervisor is frustrated at what crummy work they got back. Or they can force, and I mean force, the senior person to give them more, the proper instructions, and risk them being slightly upset at them, at that point. And I'd always said to people, you know what, you might annoy me by asking me a whole bunch of questions when I want to move on to the next thing, but that's a little bit of annoyance. You're really going to annoy me when you bring back the inadequate work. Now, having said that, people have to also learn how to ask for those instructions. Jumping into my office 15 times a day with one more question you just thought of when I'm busy is not helpful. Saying to me, thanks for the instructions, I'm going to go away and think about them, I'll come back with my questions, I respect that. Then you come back once, having really spent some time thinking about it with your whole list of questions. That's, I'm happy to sit down with you and give you all of the answers you need to, so that you can go away and do a good job at that point.
I love that. I love that. I have a client who gets interrupted. Your comment about 15 times a day is so true in some cases. And the student is well-meaning. They want to get it right. And they don't have that perspective of how disruptive that is to the partner. Those back and forth and back and forth. And so to sit and actually invest the time individually, independently, looking through what you need, creating a list of questions, but also fair to say they may not have all the questions. They don't know what they don't know. So there may be a series of other questions the next day. Or they might want to ask the partner, what have I forgotten to ask you? What do I don't, And so that's number one. Number two is sometimes timing is everything. So you talked about yourself being not always the most patient of lawyers. And I know a lot of stressed, tired partners who wish they were more patient. That's a common scenario for many people working with senior people. Timing can be everything. And how do you know when it's the right timing to circle back and get that clarity? One thing that I myself have used is ask the assistant. Because if you have a long-term or a very connected assistant with their lawyer, they know the moods of the lawyer. And sometimes the assistant is the best person to say, hey, I need 15 minutes with Murray. What's a good time? I got 4 questions. I can get in and out, but I want to make sure I have his attention and I don't want to irritate him. What do you suggest?
Absolutely. And also just being aware. Now, I had a corporate clerk who was, I thought, the best corporate clerk in the city. She was phenomenal. We worked together for many, many years. I could walk into her office and take one look at her face and say, I'm going to come back later, because I could see the stress on her face.
Yeah.
I'd say, hi, how are you? She'd look at me. What do you want? And I'd say, I want to come back this afternoon, because I could just see it on her face. Well, if you're going to walk into somebody's office and see them obviously all stressed out, maybe it isn't the best time. But I want to circle back to something else we were talking about preparing, your list of questions. Now, in the old days, when we were dealing with paper files, I used to say to people, it doesn't matter what assignment you get. It doesn't matter how small it is. You go and you read the entire file from back to front. And the same goes for electronic files, obviously. Somebody might give you a little piece of something, but you can't really understand the context unless you know everything there is to know about that matter. So that it sounds like extra work. It sounds like maybe wasted work, but somebody getting a piece of work on a file, if they make that effort to understand everything that there is about it, when they go in with that list of questions, they probably have some more questions. And maybe they've even been brilliant enough to say, or caught something and be able to say, you asked me to do this, but I noticed that 3 weeks ago, this was discussed in an email, and it seems like we've already told the client we're doing it this way. Well, now you've just saved me.
Absolutely.
And, And I have other stories, stories of people. My wife, who's a lawyer, as I said, she has a story about being told by the supervising lawyer when she was articling, you don't have to read the file. All you have to do is go into court and say this, and you'll be fine. There's no need to look at the file. And, well, she not only looked at the file, she looked at the statute. She understood everything about what she was going into court. And then the judge tried her on and asked every question imaginable about the thing. And had she just followed the instructions she were given, and she would have been crimson with embarrassment.
Whoa. So taking responsibility, not taking the instructions on its face, but taking care of yourself and taking responsibility like an owner.
Yeah.
Right? Like an independent professional. I love that. That's a great example.
Now, another aspect, I would ask somebody, to do some work, and they'd bring it to me, and I'd go through it and I'd look at it, and, there'd be a whole bunch of stuff that I could correct. And I'd say, this stuff you could have caught yourself. And what would come out is, well, they knew I was going to be looking at it and catching things. Well, no. Every time you bring me something, it's got to be done. I used to tell them it has to be done as if I'm not going to read it and it's going straight to the client.
Yes.
That's the attitude you have to take toward it, because that's how I'm judging you. When can I turn you loose on clients without me looking at your stuff? Only after you've been giving me stuff that I couldn't find anything of substance wrong with. That's how I let you go to the next stage. So if you develop that attitude that you don't have to, make it your absolute best piece of work because I'm looking at it anyway, I'm never going to know that you're ready to advance.
Excellent. I want to move on to your next biggest mistake. You talked about early on, before we set to do this interview, was thinking that hard work would be enough to make a student successful.
Hard work is very nice. I'm going to tell you a little story. So back when I articled in the old days, we're talking before email, okay? we would do our memos and we would put them on our out tray. And then this fellow would come along with a shopping cart. He'd put it there and he'd deliver it to whoever it went to. And his job was to walk around the office all day long with his shopping cart delivering our memos. Well, I wanted to be really efficient. So I worked so hard. And then I get the memo done and I put it in the out box. And, this guy would pick it up and it would get delivered somewhere. And I get on to the next piece of work. Well, this other student at the time, he would pick up his memo and walk up 3 levels of floor. I think there were 3 floors or something. And he'd walk up 3 levels and deliver it to the partner and chat with his assistant on the way in and make some light talk with the partner. He lost tons of hours, running around the office instead of being efficient like me with my head down working on the next memo. Guess who got hired back?
Yes.
It was a fellow who developed relationships and let his personality come through, and people knew him and people liked him, because we are all, as I said before, in sales, and we need to sell ourselves to the people we're working with. So the hardest working student isn't, the one who's getting ahead. It's the one who is developing personal relationships, having an opportunity to show their strengths. And yes, they have to be intelligent. And it's fantastic if they're adding value and supervisors are looking at them and saying, wow, you look like you're really going to be able to take ownership and get things done independently more quickly than, the average. That's fantastic. But they have to know you, respect you, like you, want to help you.
Well, and you talked about trust earlier, and I think that's so connected to relationships. If people know they can trust you, meaning you deliver your work on time, that you're going to take responsibility for your work, that you're going to ask tough questions and chase a partner down if you don't have the clarity that you need, et cetera, that consistent building of trust and showing up in the way that you ought to deliver on, your best product. And you said earlier, even on the smallest assignment, doing a great job on the smallest assignment is a way in which to build trust. And not just with the lawyers, as I said earlier, with all the staff. You talked about a clerk. I've talked about an assistant. The paralegals. I mean, these are backbone members of the firm. If you're lucky enough to work with a paralegal, all of those characters are going to help you avoid mistakes, et cetera.
And yes, and you said characters, but let's talk about character for a moment. There's no better way for me to judge your character than how you deal with people who you perceive as being at the lower end of the echelon in the firm. If you're always nice to me, but you're always rude to my assistant or my clerk, you've just told me who you are. Not to mention that my clerk, as I said, I think the best clerk in the world, she could make you look good or make you look bad. And if she liked you, it was, I've done this for Murray. Am I missing anything? What do you think? Oh, you better do this, this, and that. You missed that. And it comes to me, and I didn't even know that, the person got help. Now, if you've been treating her disrespectfully, I'm busy. I don't have time for that, for you.
Exactly.
So, how you deal with everybody there really says something about you. And people do know that. The word gets out right away. The entire, if you have a law firm, my firm was, let's say, 25, 30 lawyers most of the time I was there. We were usually 80 people, which meant there were 50 people who were not lawyers. And they all talked among themselves, and they all knew who they liked, who they didn't like, which first-year lawyer, which student, treated them badly. And they did their best to support the people they liked, and they did nothing for the other people.
And again, why is it so important to treat people well internally? Of course, it's that's practicing, that's being a good character and practicing good, habits. But it's going to translate to how you treat clients externally and their team and their staff.
Yeah.
Right? So we're talking about client retention here. So how you're practicing internally, how you treat people so that you can go externally and be the same authentic person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's move on to some hard truths, Murray. So let me just recap the biggest mistakes you've talked about. So one was building the self-awareness that's important, the psychological self-awareness, so that you can come in and be at your best. The second was taking ownership of your work. And then we've just finished talking about thinking that hard work will be enough to make you successful. So we covered those three. And I want to move now, and there may be a little bit of overlap with some of these, but I love the idea of, because you're from the safety of retirement, talking about hard truths. And I'm going to add this preamble. I was talking to the president of a law society in Canada recently, and he was just like a few weeks ago, and he was regaling me with stories about the stress of his fellow students, how some law firms come in, or maybe it's career services, or maybe it's somebody else in their ecosystem that's color coding things in a way that's very sunny and quite optimistic. And he was like, look, there's people who haven't had their summer positions secured yet. They don't have articles yet. They're really struggling. Even the networking that's expected of them, they're really struggling. And I wish that somebody would come and just tell people the truth and be honest. And yes, we need to build in systems to support people. And that's why one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast, to build in the support that students need that supports the ideas of what are, the most difficult parts of practicing law. So that's why one of the reasons I was excited to talk to you, Murray, about the practice of law and starting in a law firm. Is there anywhere you'd like to start on hard truths?
Hard truths. You don't know anything when you're starting to practice law. Have your ego in check, because you know absolutely nothing about what you need to know in order to succeed in a law firm. And depending on where you are, you're going to get some or no help figuring it out. So ultimately, it's your responsibility to figure out how you're going to learn what you need to learn. If you've just graduated and you think you now know it and you're at the end of your learning, you are doomed. You have so much to learn about how law firms work, about how to manage files, about how to speak to clients, about how to develop your self-confidence, ultimately about how to, network and develop business. And you need to locate people who are going to help you do that. You can do it through the sink or swim method. I did it that way. I do not recommend it, but it's possible. But you have to be able to figure out who's going to help you. And one of the hardest truths is, just because you went to a big firm does not mean it's going to happen for you. The most important thing is, who are you directly reporting to, who is going to be supervising you. You pick any big firm, and I will, tell you there are some people there who are fantastic. Your life is set because you went to work for them, and there are others who are disasters. And do not believe the publicity that comes from their marketing departments. It has nothing to do with it. So that, I think, is the first hard truth: is you don't know what you need to know, and you are not guaranteed a way to find it out. It's your responsibility to figure that out and to hopefully get into the best position to learn it.
I'm from Vancouver, so I often talk about the rainy Sunday afternoons. Pull out your files, pull out the acts that you're needing to learn, pull out some of your resource materials, look at the client, files, etc. Do some of your homework during the weekends so that Monday morning, have you ever heard of the Sunday scaries, Murray?
I absolutely have. I lived them.
You live them?
I lived them.
I have too.
Hey, the weekend was, Saturday you work for part of the day. You try to relax and enjoy yourself a little Saturday afternoon and evening, and Sunday morning for a few hours before you start getting nervous about Monday. That was my life for many, many years.
How would you have changed that?
That's too long an answer, because that, I think, involves changing your entire life and psychology and position. The real answer to that is, don't get yourself into a work situation which demands 7 days a week. But that isn't what you meant when you said, how would you change it? I don't have a good answer for that. I certainly would, as you were alluding to, be preparing on Sunday, so I know where I'm headed for Monday. Absolutely.
And if it's easier for somebody to prepare on a Saturday so they can have their Sundays free and clear to rest and be ready and fresh for Monday morning, great. Do what works for you. But doing a little bit of prep in order to lower any anxiety, to sweep away the Sunday scaries, I think is a worthy, even if it's an hour, I think it's a worthy hour, right?
Yeah, but I want to go back to something you talked about before. You were alluding to or talking about reading statutes, for example. I was a corporate lawyer. If somebody came and joined my firm, I said to them, read the Business Corporations Act cover to cover. If you want, I'll tell you which sections you can kind of ignore, but read it, come to me with your questions. When they're finished that, read the Personal Property Security Act. If you're a litigator, read the Rules of Practice, read the Courts of Justice Act. There's a certain amount of stuff that, yeah, maybe you saw at some point during law school and haven't thought about much since. And now you're in a law firm and nobody is paying you to sit down and read this stuff, but you've got to do it. You need to have a program of what you need to know and an agenda for figuring it all out. As you said, nobody's paying you to do that, but you are going to pay in stress for not having done it.
And it comes back to taking responsibility for your practice and acting like an owner and taking responsibility and taking the initiative that you need to do your best work. And
realizing, which nobody other than me maybe says, just bluntly to you, whether you've been practicing for 5 minutes or 50 years, you've got the same responsibility. You're subject to the same liability for negligence claims. You're responsible. You have the same responsibility for complying with the rules of professional conduct, which is another thing you should have read cover to cover. And the partner told me to do it. It's not a defense. So unfortunately, from the first minute that you're qualified as a lawyer, you're expected to know all the stuff that people have been practicing for years need to know, as far as potential malpractice claims or ethical violations are. So get at it and start learning that stuff.
Absolutely. And going back to what you were saying about when the partner tells you to read statutes, go and read them. It's not just a light suggestion. If a partner assigns work to you, go and do it. The other thing I'd like to add to the 7-day work week is, on occasion, yes, you'll have to work a weekend. Yes, you'll have to work evenings, but that shouldn't be, and I don't believe it's sustainable. And I'm going back to your own lifestyle and maybe some regrets that you might have had, Murray. But I think at times you got to work hard. At times you're working long days. At times you're giving up a weekend. But by and large, you should.
Is that Vancouver talking?
It should be. It's Vancouver talking.
That's Vancouver talking. That's not Toronto talking. No, you're talking Vancouver, where people are sane, where they want to be mentally healthy, where they expect some aspect of work-life balance and mental health. No, I'm talking Toronto, where people routinely, in the bigger firms are expected to work constantly, where they're told at some firms, if you're on vacation, you're expected to check your voicemail or your email every day and be available. So, of course, there's going to be places in both Toronto and Vancouver which fit both molds, but it is different. And in fact, I've spoken to people at some of the biggest firms in the country in the Vancouver office, and they are much more relaxed and happy than the people at the same firm in the Toronto office. People in the Ottawa office are happier also, which comes down to every firm and every office of every firm has a different culture. And you need to know what you're getting into and what the expectations are. And I happen to agree with you. I've written and talked extensively about mental health and work-life balance. But frankly, I only started thinking about that after I retired, because during my working career, I was way too busy to think about being mentally healthy, which is why I wasn't mentally healthy. And I did work very often during large parts of my career, 7 days a week. And yes, I agree with you. You have to find balance and you have to figure out what works for you. But you're also running into the headstream of the profession and what you're taught and where the money is. So the money goes from the big firms to the law schools. So there's a lot of practical things going on. There's this belief that you've been subconsciously taught that to be successful, you have to be at one of these firms. There's the debt that you might have picked up and feel you have to work off. And there's a culture of working extremely hard. And somewhere in the middle, you're supposed to balance that, learn how to set boundaries, and preserve your mental health.
There are a lot of other firms of all varying sizes that will try to grind students and associates. And it's incumbent. I think the point I'd like to take away here, it's really incumbent as best you can as a student or a new associate is to get clarity and the reality of how the firm that you're looking at, how they actually roll. what the target hours are for a year, how they treat their associates. Really do your due diligence on that firm
Absolutely right.
and ask those hard questions.
Absolutely right. I'll tell you a story of one of my mentees, and you're right. It's not only big law. It's just, should I say, mostly big law, but it's not only big law. So this young lawyer went, after about 3 years. She joined a firm, and this firm was a boutique firm in Toronto, and it was, a lot of the boutique firms are populated by lawyers who used to be at big law and leave and set up their own boutique. And she was really impressed because they sold her on the idea that there was no billable hour target. And for the first time, she thought, this is going to be great. There is no billable hour target at this firm. This was the worst thing could have happened to her. No billable hour target was because you were expected to work all the time. So this was just a small firm, under 5 lawyers, and she's working till 11 o'clock at night almost every day, plus commuting after that. And she's working evenings, and she's working the evenings, she's working the weekends. Because there's no billable hour target. And they literally sold it as an advantage when it was actually the opposite, because there was no clear expectation as to how hard you had to work. So you just worked all the time.
That's all great, Marie. I think that's all fair. And one of the last hard truths that I have noted here is that each person needs to define success for themselves, which segues into this from what you're talking about in terms of billable hours, long days, not knowing what you're getting into. So to define success for oneself, and part of that I think is difficult because you don't know what you don't know, and you can hear the warnings, you can get the good advice, etc. But until you're in there, until you're starting to face burnout, and burnout is real, and it can come upon you very quickly without warning.
Yep.
It's time, and it might come at the end of your articles. You think, you've had an inside look at the firm. Maybe you're in one of those firms, regardless of size, that really grinds people. Maybe you have to take a hard decision and start looking for another firm, even if you have to leave and have a gap of employment.
Yeah. Look, in terms of defining success for yourself, if you really sit and think about it, in the profession, you can define success many ways. The primary way people define it is by how much money they make. Beyond that, you can define it as prestige in the profession and being known for your expertise. You can define it by building a successful client base. But more importantly, you have to define what success is in your personal life. Hopefully, for many of us, that's having strong relationships, having time to spend with our significant others, having time to spend with our children, having time to go to the gym and be physically fit. I find what most of us do, and certainly the mistake I made, is we first strive to do as well as we can in the profession and put in whatever time and effort it takes to do that. Then we try to squeeze our personal life in around that. And the first things that we have to give up are going to the gym and staying fit and, spending as much time with our significant others we like and things like that. I mean, that's why you have, high divorce rates in the profession. You have high, addiction rates, tremendously high addiction rates, mental health problems, etc. If we had a different focus, it would be to define what we want in our personal lives and then to figure out how in the profession we can devote the time to be in the profession that doesn't conflict with what we want personally. And there's an expression that says, begin as you mean to continue. And I hear from a lot of people about, I'll work really hard for the first 5 years. I'll pay off that student debt, and then maybe I'll leave, for less demanding firm, etc. But after the 5 years, they've lived up to the lifestyle. They're driving the car. They're living in the fancy house. They're going on the fancy trips, and all of a sudden, preserving that income level seems really, really important to them. So there is something to be said for really figuring yourself out and possibly, as I said, beginning as you mean to continue. But if you're not going to do that, at least having a really concrete plan as to how you're going to turn it off and switch to something else if you can't keep up that pace.
Murray, if a student could take all of this advice from you and put as much of it into practice as possible, we'd have a very different profession in the years to come. I think we'd have a healthier profession. We'd have a profession that is more authentic, and relationships would be stronger. we'd have less mental health issues, less addiction issues, etc. And I really thank you for sharing all that you have here today and kind of taking us back through your own career and your own lessons and the hard truths. And just want to thank you ever so much. If people want to follow you on LinkedIn, I will add your LinkedIn address in the episode notes below. And I know that you also put out your shingle to mentor folks if they would like to have advice from somebody who is a truth teller and somebody who needs somebody who's been through it all. And they can, I suppose, contact you through LinkedIn or your email address.
Yeah. Or my website, which is just my name, murraygottheil.com, or lawanddisorder.inc.com.
Law and Disorder.
Yes, I'm always happy to speak to people. I have this really interesting mentoring fee schedule, which goes from absolutely free if you're new to the profession and can't afford it, up to $1 million if you really are fixated on wanting a fixed fee. You can find that on my website. I speak to people all the time. A few of them pay me. Most of them don't. It's all good. I just enjoy working with people and helping them if I can.
You're giving back. I appreciate that, Murray. We'll put all of those details in the episode notes below. And don't forget to subscribe, hit subscribe, and give us a thumbs up or a comment. Murray, thank you ever so much. Really a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Stay tuned for our Lawyer Launcher debrief. He was good, right? I really enjoyed that conversation. He has so much to share and so many stories. I mean, you can imagine after 40 years of practice how much he has to draw from. Some of the things that I took away: ownership of your work, making sure that you're taking responsibility for your work is so very important. And he coupled it with making it easier for your supervising lawyer, go beyond what's being asked of you, making it safe for you to ask more questions, being accurate with your work as much as possible, having immunity to ask questions, working with staff, treating them well, but using them to help you deliver the best quality work that you possibly can. Avoiding burnout is real. He talked about, just briefly, about his own struggles with mental health and workload, and he would probably do things differently now, knowing what he knows now. So sharing that wisdom, I think, from his level of experience, I think could be very helpful. And then defining success for yourself. And he talked a little bit about values, whether it's your family or working out, whatever are your values. Maybe it's religion, or making space for the things that are most important to you, and then wrapping work around it. And that might mean working late at night to make sure you fit everything in, but putting your own self first, putting your values first, and wrapping work around it sounds pretty good to me, as long as you can get the work done. So I hope that you enjoyed that interview. I thought he was fantastic. Again, go and follow him on LinkedIn and you'll learn more. Thanks for joining us.